The laws of karma is one of the foundational functions of the devil worshippers' society, which are engaged in the hate group's functions of using the intelligence system for secret operations for their hate crimes, which requires the division into several groups. Now, the entire exhaustive position is not something I directly have the records for, but I have a few things. So we'll get into the primary overarching construct of the devil worshippers, which are separate to the demonic worshippers. And the demonic worshippers separate because they do not care about the interest of karma or the function of the laws of nature, which are respected and acknowledged by the devil worshippers. The function of the arbitrary forces is the activity of liberation from the laws of nature of God, which fully endures them to the function of their arbitrary thrashings, which allows them to engage in all kinds of evil for the sake of its own pleasure and benefit, allowing for their participation in the longest extension of the Faustian deal. And as they are devoted to chaos, the structure of law and order and hierarchy is substantively ignored. And their opposition to the devil worshippers is active love-hate relationship, which requires them to undermine the devil worshippers, while at the same time they need the relationship with the devil worshippers in order to sustain their lifestyle of arbitrary evil, turning good into evil and evil into good, needs the uniting of chaos and law in order to sustain the demonic minded in their irrational abuses, seeking the enjoyment of their psychotic pursuits of abuse for the sake of its own entertainment, those who are thoroughly addicted to the function, at which point those who are compromised in the addiction are in the perpetual cycle of the demonic worshipping. And the devil worshippers requires the enjoyment of the use of karmic relationships and spiritual relationships of all kinds of values, which includes the function of creating debts by capturing those who are engaged in cosmic evil. And they have to disconnect as an impartial agent in order to enforce this, similar to the American rules for law enforcement before the pollution of the arbitrary Confederacy and its demonic pursuits of using it for the sake of political and other hate crime violence, which generates the position for the devil worshippers to consistently generate the revenue of collecting the debts, which facilitates them not having the liabilities from the debts, which requires them to disconnect from the karmic evil, which is inherently connected to that profession. At which point, the position of their acceleration in the hierarchy is the collection of more debts and fewer liabilities, allowing them to have a positive debt currency bank account, which facilitates the overarching function of their enjoyment of the higher status functions. And with these arbitrary values, they are allowed to be as evil as they please to those who have legitimately been captured, as there is no negative karma to those who deserve punishment to have evil lashed against them. The position of would you punch a Nazi? Would you punch Hitler? Would you do any of those punishments to people who you felt deserved it in the cosmic array of morality from your point of view? At which point, the fact that they're guilty means they are to be punished, which means they can receive as much of that as you like, and you're given better luxuries and preferences on the basis of your hierarchy from your account, on your ability to balance the karmic evils and the karmic goods and the connections of those spiritual relationships. At which point, the only way to truly undermine them is to get them to align with the guilt of the karmic evil. And their alignment and refusal to detach from karmic evil puts them in a position where they have received a debt or liability, and thus any benefit that they got is mediated against the cost of their participation in that, requiring them to join it to a larger scheme, so that even if they do have to pay the liability, it is less than the total scheme structure, uh, meaning that the cost of business is lowered, at which point those who are trying to undermine them want them to align with the karmic evils. At this point, you have the system of those who worship the Canaanite gods and similar things. At which point, the engagement of the resurrection of those gods of power and their ability to claim spiritual power over a community, culture, or nation, giving them the powers is the acceleration service to those deities, which facilitates their capacity to reenact the position of their hierarchy with the provision of having given it to them, which gives them a higher resource and a higher hierarchy status, at which point the function of choosing their masters or new gods facilitates their capacity to have served them on the margins, which facilitates the mechanism which requires them to remain impartial for the superior desired positions. Now, the position has actively been observed through many teachings, such as with Mark Driscoll and the Jezebel spirit, which is actively connected to those, and I highly encourage people to look that up. Uh, the engagement includes the function of once the society has been given to the Jezebel's spirit, then her worship of her god facilitates the obligation to engage in demasculizing the community, the engagement of maximized use of the creation of eunuchs or the destruction of the ability to reproduce, the punishments and systems of payment requiring them to become eunuchs or sexually inerted, such as the poisoning of the water to reduce testosterone in the system, feminizing people, is their acceptance as a transgender and the rejection of masculinity. The function of rejecting masculinity is essential to their agreement, at which point the use of their arbitrary abuses to use as a cover for their arbitrary uses of their wizard spells, which engages all kinds of government secrets in order to effect these positions, includes Plato's conspiracy for rape culture, which engages in the function of choosing for people their sexual options and non-options, which generates the capacity of their communism of predetermined status and hierarchy in the system on the basis of the social connections with the fraudulent cover of the spell's results from the tampering, which not being submitted to the courts is an act of contempt for the courts and for law and the balances of checks and balances, which would have facilitated the oppositions to their violation, which requires the devil worshippers to have the cover of a false punishment, which requires the existence of a false morality by which to violate to receive the punishment so that they can engage in the worship of their goddess, who is the wife of Baal, who requires child sacrifices, such as their sacrifice system by their child sacrifice for child soldiers and for the function of the hierarchy of those who are being used as tools for the overarching position, dedicating them to the function of the higher arrangement in their cult religions. At which point, those who are dedicated to the subordinate actions, such as the function of the creation and manifestation of their Antichrist, from Revelation, which is the materialization of Canaan defeating Israel. Now, Canaan is condemned by Noah for his father's crime of uncovering him, which is, in some estimates, regardless of how reliable they are. The assumption that the father of Canaan neutered his father, uh, cutting off his dick and balls, creating him into a eunuch, which is the assumption that they provide, which is the worship to the goddess, and the function of them creating the sacrifice system of their children for their predetermined cosmic purpose at the worship of their Canaanite gods facilitates the order of their compulsions in society, which has been centrally planned at every level by the use of secrets enforced by the spells. And the use of the spells is the persistent engagement of crime and fraud in order to manifest the engagement, at which point the society is ruled by a cult of wizards similar to the function of the KKK, who are merely an arrangement of a druidic order to have non-connection control over the general public superior to the hierarchy of the nation's government, and being superior to their king or the leaders of that government can then disregard any of their orders and have them switched and replaced and have absolute domination over them, facilitating the actual government as the secret government, which is the state compelled religion to the Canaanite gods. Now, as many may have been able to study, Jesus in his lineage came from Moab, uh, and the function of him coming from Moab is the uniting of Moab in the overthrowing of Israel by the Canaanites. Now, the function of the curse from Noah that Canaan will be a slave to all is the statement on maturity that Jesus is a slave to all and thus fulfilling the curse. And thus the position that Jesus took on all sins and all curses of those liabilities facilitates him to have manifested it, which required him to be connected to that curse in order to control it or to take it onto himself, or there would be no overlapping function by which for him to claim superiority over the offense. But this required that the servants of the devil, or the function of many of the Canaanite gods in the arrangement of pantheism and the rest of it, facilitated their position of creating the cosmic evil of the cosmic debt, which creates the attachment committing a crime against another, putting them into a major state of liability. And he who had no sin being opposed by Satan to create the cosmic evil debts against Satan to do the crime against Christ in order to have him sacrificed facilitates the position of Satan's actual material reduction by the cosmic evil, which puts the weight of the debts onto him for the major reduction of his place in the hierarchy. Now, the position in the Bible that Satan was able to go up to God is based upon his non-connection to that cosmic debt, which before Christ there was nothing juicy enough in order to compromise him into creating a cosmic debt. He could just play with everyone and create the negative side effects and collect the revenues impartially until, of course, Jesus, which was an attractive enough offer for him to do so. And the activity of him doing so has created the cosmic debts, which has renounced his place from heaven, sinking him. If the function of his ability to ascend and descend engagements is similar to the function of swimming in water, then the cosmic liability of the cosmic debts of their karmic connection in its evil would then be an exponential weight, forcing the sinking of the person, similar to a scuba diver who applies weights who wants to reduce in depth pretty quickly, without going through all of the stresses of swimming and de-escalated into the lower areas. They want a faster sink, at which point those debts create those faster sinks, which prevents Satan from re-entering heaven after that point from the cosmic evil, which is an overlapping function into the purpose of the devil worshippers and the devil um, affiliated demon worshippers, which have engaged in the function of the Warren David and their various distractions through the protocols of Lord Elder Zion and the other stratagems which have engaged in their use of their Canaanite worship of the child sacrifices and the rest of those arrangements which they've conducted and are actively doing so in the public's eye without the condemnation of the general public on the basis of the social engineering and their frauds, which engages in the position. Now, those who want the devil worshippers are actively conducting the Antichrist ritual, which creates the manifestation of someone as powerful as they believe David to become the one world Antichrist, or state established religion of the replacement to Christ, which facilitates the entirety of these arrangements with absolute global domination in an unchallengeable way, which facilitates the automation of the retaliation of David as king of the world against all who have conducted the offenses against him for brutal retaliations with absolute mindless force, which facilitates their position of their maintenance of the hierarchy, as long as they have not connected to the cosmic evils, which the karmic relationship requires them to play the game correctly. Now, the only way to undermine them according to the strategies which they've been succeeding in is to coerce them into accepting the cosmic evil of the karmic connection to the crimes by their obstruction of contracts, which requires the demonic to convince the devils to continue the obstruction of contracts for the criminal reduction of David's statuses for those arrangements, making them specifically guilty and liable karmically and legally to all of the offenses which they are to pay in their entirety. Now, if they're to win their game, they have to disconnect from the karma, which means they have to return the debts and the contracts which are being obstructed, uh, which is the only way for them to manifest that value. Now, under their religious position, they have to return the contracts and maintain the position of their arrangements. So the only way to undermine the devil worshippers creating the Antichrist for the retaliation against evil, for the entire world to suffer, as the rapture removes all of the good. And if you've removed all of the good, you have all of the punishments of revelation against the evil, which is primarily the retaliations against the demonic worshippers, which they're actively trying to avoid, as they've deserved their position as the Ponzi's, Patsies, and pawns of the arranged devil worshippers. And their position being sustained by this agreement means that the only way for the demon worshippers and the rest of the arbitrary terrorist supporters for the overthrowing of the government in the terrorists and the harassments and the frauds and the arrangements of the various abuses in the war on David requires them to agree with the devil worshippers to remove the obstruction of David's contracts, which creates um, the closing of exit ways for the devil worshippers. And with the fewer exits, the harder it becomes for the devil worshipper to be karmically disconnected from the thing, at which point the fewer exits to collect on the debt while still not being liable means only the higher status ones can sustain themselves. All of the lower level ones would fail with the lack of exits and be put in with the rest of the demonics as they fail to find the escape and they choose the liability. So the demonic needs the unshackled evil, which requires the blocking of the exits for the devil worshippers, which facilitates their access to unlimited, unrestrained, pleasurable evil for everyone. At that point, you have the mechanism of their complete and total defeat of the devils and having claimed the earth away from them.